Welcome candidates and participants, and welcome on behalf of our organisations. I'm representing Nelson Tasman Climate Forum, which is a community-led organisation working on an urgent response to climate change and therefore eager to understand candidates' views on that topic. And I will also mention Tasman Environmental Trust is one of the hosting organisations, and it's an umbrella organisation for multiple conservation groups. And Scott Burnett will introduce himself and his organisation.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Scott. I'm the Top of the South Advocacy Manager for Forest and Bird. Forest and Bird's New Zealand's oldest, largest conservation organisation. And I'm also the board chair for the Tasman Environmental Trust, which supports 29 community projects across Tasman Bay and Golden Bay.
Thanks, Scott. So Tim King, Tim Neubauer, Richard Osmiston, Richard Johns, welcome. And we'll give Maxwell a special welcome when he joins.
Timo Neubauer. Don't forget the O at the end of my name.
Oh, no, I don't know. That's that important, Timo. Tim, Timo, it's all pretty much the same thing. Your signs are doing a wonderful job.
Okay. So voters who are listening, you'll be paying attention to the views and ideas of these candidates on protection and restoration of nature and an urgent response to both mitigation and adaptation to climate change. When you form your views based on what you hear, we encourage you to tell your friends and family about them and to let them know that they can go online to the website of Nelson Tasman Climate Forum and listen to the recordings of these ward by ward sessions. So each candidate was given 3 preset questions, and we'll address their brief responses to these first, and then we'll move to audience questions. And voters in the audience, please type your questions into the Q&A column on your screen. We have some rules, and our rules are that we expect respect and courtesy from our participants towards our candidates. And from us, you can expect fairness in giving airtime. We'll be fairly strict on this, both with candidates and with participants asking questions. 2 minutes maximum for responses from candidates and about half a minute for questions. And we'll take the liberty of stopping questioners stopping candidates if you stray from the subject of the question. All candidates will have an opportunity to respond to each question, but can say that they have nothing to add if they wish. And we'll vary the order in which candidates respond, so no one goes first or last all the time. Now for the questions, and over to Scott to start us off.
Thanks, Joanna. And for our first question, the question is, could you list actions that you would prioritise to protect and restore nature in our region? And we'll start with Timo.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate that. Look, Tasman is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I've lived in many places, and this is absolutely stunning. And that is due to its wild countryside, the stunning coastline, and the fertile land that we've got. But that's under pressure. One thing that I'm following with a lot of interest at the moment is what's going on in Golden Bay. You've got some of the purest water in the world at Pupu Springs, and that is one of the things that's under pressure at the moment to maintain the integrity of the aquifer and Pupu Springs itself. It's of utmost importance for Golden Bay. So I think, at the moment you might have heard of this, there's an application in for fast tracking for a mining operation at Sam's Creek. I understand that's out of local government's hands, but I think we should still do whatever we can to advocate and protect advocate for the protection of and the integrity of the of that water, of that aquifer. And there will be things that we can do as a council, but on a bigger scale. And I like to address the big ticket items. It's part of my drive for efficiency. We are expecting an RMA reform that's going to require us in the next term to zone for 30 years of growth. Now, if we keep going on the trajectory as we are at the moment, we are going to sprawl out over an enormous amount of land, and that's going to encroach on everything there is around us. So I would drive as a top priority a planning approach for stronger towns and villages, where we concentrate our activities on existing urban areas. We improve our existing urban areas, a much better approach to the way we would be dealing with them. I'm an architect and urban designer, so I understand a little bit about that. And in doing that, we would protect the land, the lifestyle, and the identity that make our region special.
Thanks, Timo. And now turning to you, Tim.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and for those who are participating online as well. So in no particular order, the key things I think is focusing on the key areas at risk. So in this region, that is the coastal habitat and particularly wetlands. There's been a lot of work done over the last number of years, and a lot of this requires collaboration. So it's collaboration with landowners, collaboration with volunteer groups. So the catchment programs such as the Moochery, which has involved a huge amount of fencing and planting, that is a key area to keep going. To consider biodiversity corridors and enhancing those, such as the Waimea Delta project, which provides the opportunity for both for nature to relocate as the environment changes. So that's crucially important, and particularly because of the risk to those coastal habitats. Completing a whole range of job for nature programs. I think last year we planted 144,000 trees in a wide cross-section of the region, primarily for carbon sequestration, but they always have the added benefit of providing for biodiversity, both restoration and protection. On a larger scale, continuing to be involved in support Kotahitanga Motitaio, which is more of that landscape approach, bringing in a lot of outside funding from other sources, particularly philanthropic, to try and address some of these broader issues on a landscape scale. And again, the focus on wetlands. So the two most at-risk habitats are our coastal habitats and our wetlands. And the restoration program that's been going on across multiple sites over multiple years, most notably the award that was won for the Sananad project most recently. And the last thing is to just consider what the new legislation around plans, protections, rules, regulations may throw up, and then work with that. At the moment, while we had draft plan changes ready to consult on a number of issues like biodiversity and landscape, the government has put all planning on hold unless you get an exemption from central government. I fear it's unlikely we'll get exemption for those particular plan changes.
Thanks, Tim. Just to clarify, one thing you mentioned was the Kotahitanga Motitaio Alliance. And for our listeners who aren't aware, that's a strategy for the top of the South and a governance grouping of councils, iwi, Ministry of Fisheries, Department of Conservation, Ministry for the Environment, that's looking at ecological restoration across the whole of the top of the South. And now over to Richard Osmuston.
Thanks very much, everybody. Great to see you. And yeah, thank you for putting the show on. Yeah, good question, Tim, to Scott, to get us started off with. And I think I'm going to go straight in at the deep end in that why do we need to protect or restore nature at all? What is it in our society that causes harm to those things in the first place? And of course, it's capitalism. We all know that. Nobody can deny it anymore. And the rapacious exploitation of nature is what we're up against. And the only reason we have a rapacious exploitation of nature is to try and wring money out of it. So, you know, today I'm going to go for it in that we will never beat the capitalists at their own game. All the time we need to get those money tokens, we don't stand a chance, because without money you perish. And so inevitably the money moves up this priority scale until it becomes the most dominant thing in the whole of our society. And so we're fighting that unwinnable battle all the time. We revolve our society around the acquisition of money. With our calculations at Money Free New Zealand, we could easily and without cost, in human, natural, social terms, without any harm whatsoever to anybody, we could abandon approximately 90% of our exporting. So if you imagine the reduction in the consumption of land, fertilizer, resources, fuel, time, energy, etc., reducing by 90%, imagine how many dairy farms, how many vineyards, how many exotic forests could be merely allowed to retire, as well as their occupants, and just leave them back to nature to restore themselves. We could pull up all the fences. We won't artificially inseminate the dairy cows. We can knock off all the logging, because all the products, logs, wine, and the dairy products and the meat products, we can't even afford for a Kiwi population. They certainly don't go to feed poor people.
Richard, you've passed 2 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. In the long run, that's what we need to look at. Thank you. Sorry, Scott. Yeah. I haven't got my watch.
Sorry, I was on mute. And last but not least, Richard Johns.
Yeah, I think the big thing is education, because making people aware of what's actually worth saving. I know in Pracefoot, where I was in Seaton Valley, we tried to get that remnant bit of bush saved and protected. And in the end, we had to bypass TDC and go to Forest and Bird to actually get some protection for that bush. And so I think it's education, people to make them aware, make them what's about. And to me, that's the most important thing, because it doesn't matter what rules you put in unless people know about them and how they can either get help or to get identity for certain projects that they want to do, and that help's available. Yeah, it's a big battle. But the other thing is while we hear all sorts of good words out of TDC, at the moment there's a proposal down in Mapua on the winds there. So on one hand, they're telling you one thing, and on the other hand, they're actually doing other actions. And I think it's to make sure that TDC themselves, their actions actually match their words as to what they're saying. Because from what I've seen, likes of that Mapua one, it's certainly a huge wetland there that could be a real benefit. And it's, to me, it's worth saving. So yeah, education, and then making sure that TDC actually carry out that, what they say they're going to do. Because on that same bit of remnant bush, while we were trying to get it saved, they had a road mower come down and whacked a whole bunch of branches 4.5 meters back from the road edge off a 350-year-old beech tree.
Sorry, Richard, you have passed your 2 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you, though.
Okay.
And over to you, Joanna, for the second question.
Righto. Next question is, could you list actions that you'd prioritize that would reduce Tasman region's greenhouse gas emissions, which are among the highest per capita in the world? And we'll go first to Tim King.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive challenge trying to reduce an entire region's emission profile, and particularly given that a large chunk of our region is primary industry based. And I think everyone's aware how challenging reductions in that space are. Interestingly, though, in the latest inventory, primary emissions from the primary sector have dropped 15%. So, and that's reflected over a number of other parts of our regional emission profile. So, for a region that's growing and getting more people, growing pretty quickly, to have a reduction across most areas of our carbon emissions is a good thing. The biggest focus has to be for the council, firstly, to lead by example and address its own emission profile. The two biggest ones that we directly influence are waste and landfill emissions. And there's been a significant reduction in that space through a number of issues to do with collecting gas and flaring it at East Valley, and then a better solution, which is the provision of gas to Nelson Hospital from the jointly owned landfill in Nelson City Council. Working with industries, particularly the construction industry, to reduce the amount of waste that goes to landfill in the first place. And there's a big emphasis and focus on reuse and recycling in that space. And that's an area that's developing all the time. Transport emissions, so the significant investment over the last 5 years in public transport and also active transport, so that's walking and cycling, is helping to pull that down despite the growing population. The council's own vehicle fleet, so investment in both EVs and hybrid vehicles. And lastly, a significant investment in solar panels on council buildings. So the Richmond Library, the Motueka Library, the new building at Port Tarakoe, and also investing in energy efficiency measures and solar use for pumping water. So there's a whole range of things we can do to directly affect our emissions. And then there's the education and leadership role that we continue to push out through our climate response and resilience strategy.
Thanks.
Encouraging response. Thank you, Tim. Next to Richard Osmaston.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. And jolly good. I think it is an encouraging response. And it's amazing to see, even despite the rapacious nature of capitalism, that, you know, even our councils, etc., are trying really hard to do the right thing. It's very expensive. It's very inconvenient, but it shows the public sentiment to do the right thing. And I think, you know, this is early days yet in this. We only really started to understand the climate issues, etc., in very recent times. And of course, society as a whole is very slow to react, especially in the first place, as we acknowledge how serious it is. So I fully accept this is a transition time, and we're going to do our best with cycleways, renewable energy, electric buses, etc. But they're just a start. And at some point, we really are going to have to grasp the nettle, acknowledge the elephant in the room, that it's capitalism and exporting and our relentless consumption and materialism that really drives these emissions. And as I said in the previous question, we could effortlessly, without cost and with no reduction in anybody's lifestyle, reduce our exports by 90% in all those primary industries. The reduction, I mean, it would basically mean we were going beyond sustainable and back into self-renewable, would be consuming so little resources. So there's a massive amount at stake, and there's a very easy fix. And it's just a matter of time before people get their heads around it. But I fully acknowledge that some people will be ahead and some people will be further behind. So, I mean, I think it's very encouraging that we're really trying hard to do the right thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. On to Richard Johns.
Yeah, I've probably come from a bit different position on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. As far as the emissions, yes, education is a main part of it, but it's understanding what's actually the whole cycle of climate change and that is doing, because it's been changing for so long, and what part of it human consumption and everything actually plays in it, because there's a very varying amount of sort of discussion on it from various scientists and things like that. So I think from that point of view, we actually need to just to understand what's driving it, because I think it's accepted that probably 96% or somewhere around there is actually comes from natural carbon emission and things like that. So Yeah, I've been involved in Aussie on capturing methane from a landfill, so I know it can be done. And the technology for doing that is advancing. But to me, it's education and, trying to understand the whole concept of it. And then we know what we can actually do and what we're not wasting our time trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard Johns. And finally, Timo.
You're on mute, Timo.
Richard, I can agree with you on something. Education. I think that's really what we need to hone in on, because otherwise we end up with a whole lot of token gestures, and some of those token gestures can be quite expensive. Don't get me wrong. I think every little bit helps, but unless we actually know what has the greatest emissions in our life and in our lifestyle, in what we do, how can we actually address it? And that's where we see a lot of things going wrong. And for instance, TDC focusing so much on its operational emissions, to me, it's a red herring, because if you really look at it and you actually talk to scientists around the world, they'll all agree the biggest thing that we can do, that a local authority, that Tasman District Council can do, is better planning. If we get away from this dispersed settlement pattern and actually go for quality compact, we have a much better profile. And I've actually written an article about this last year called "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff" when it comes to emission savings. And I calculated what we could have saved compared to the operational savings that we had both in Nelson and Tasman. And at the time, sorry, Tim, it was bugger all in Tasman. You saved about 84 tons in that year. That is bugger all. And if we even combine that with the savings that you had in Nelson, which was quite a lot more, it's still nothing. You could get 23 times the savings with better planning, because a lot of our emissions are actually transport based, and we need to nip that one in the bud with a more quality compact system. And you know what? The best thing is, it doesn't cost us anything. It actually saves us money. More efficient infrastructure means lower rates in the future. But I will probably be cut off very soon because I'm drifting off to a different topic.
You will be cut off now. Sorry, Timo. Okay, thank you. That completes that round. On to you, Scott.
Yeah, so for our next question, what actions do you think would reduce the impact of climate change on humans and the rest of nature in Tasman region? And this time we'll start with Richard Osmaston.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, what actions would reduce that impact? Well, really by freeing people to start restoration. And of course, the changes that we are proposing, which I realize we're not ready for quite yet, but we can make a start, Even Tasman District Council can make a start on how we're going to do things in the future. The resource-based economy that we're proposing, without money, without trade, barter, commerce, advertising, etc., everything will be free and everything will be entirely voluntary. Very important to keep those two together, free and voluntary. Already, we have seen that people only voluntarily do things that are good. They don't do things voluntarily that are harmful. It just doesn't make sense when you understand human motivations. And because of this massive reduction in the pointless work that we are forced to do to get money, most people will be relieved of having to do anything compulsorily whatsoever. The production of food, building materials, the things that we actually need to have a great life is so effortless today because of our amazing technology that we can all have the things that we need with very little human input. That frees all those working people, and as I said, it's 90-something% of primary production. It's a huge percentage of people that are involved in money production or processing. Those people will be free to do what their society, their community, their whānau, their family, their animals, their conscience tells them to do, which is as we see when we have a crisis or when we're actually retired or we've got a bit of time other than the acquisition of money, which makes everybody desperate. When we have time, we actually want to help, we want to restore, we want to protect. And with that many people having that much time, it would be easy to do that with zero effort, and it would be fantastic for society. Thanks.
Thank you,
Just
Richard.
under, well done.
And now to you, Richard Johns. And I think you're just breaking up just a little bit at times. And I wonder if you were a little bit closer to the microphone and the screen, and the computer, it would be better.
Yeah, I think it's changing mindset. The biggest problem we've got is mindset, and especially here where over summer we get so many people come here from Stitch driving up. On the night Christmas Eve last year, there were 850,000 people flew in aircraft around New Zealand and overseas. So unless you change that mindset, it's just going to continue. People want to do what they want to do. And while they turn around and say, oh, yeah, you know, I'm green, I'm going to save the planet and everything, and then they're offered an overseas holiday, they're on a plane and gone. So unless you actually change the mindset on people to sort of take it on board and not just pick parts out that suit them, they've actually got to either be fully on board or not. Like I walk outside my house and naturally I'm 15 degrees lower temperature because I've got grass and everything. We've got one strip of concrete about 12 metres long and about 1 metre wide. And whereas if you live in town with all your concrete structures and everything like that, you're actually creating or helping create part of the problem. So I think it's taking everything on board. TDC say they're going to do it, but then they cart supposedly contaminated material from out in Rewalker and take it to a dump site on the other side of town. You know, it's just looking at things differently and actually seeing, you know, putting it all together rather than just paying lip service to it and then carrying on in the way we're going. And we definitely have to change the mindset to do that. And that's going to be a big issue because people can be quite selfish about what they want. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And Timo.
Yeah, unmuted. I'm here. Look, I think if we look at mitigation of flood events, for instance, I think when people have come through an event like we've just had, it's quite normal to focus on the symptoms, and you see those issues right there in front of you and feel, oh, we need to reinforce riverbanks, we need to deepen the channel, those sort of considerations. And yes, we probably do need to look at better river management in parts. But what I would like to do here is think a little bit bigger and think about what is actually contributing to these events and why are these events getting so out of hand. And a lot of it, in my view, is to do with land use and what's happening upstream, literally upstream from the communities that are affected by these events. And that includes land uses like forestry. You know, what we're doing here in New Zealand is quite different to what's actually legally allowed anywhere else in, well, I wouldn't say anywhere, but in many parts of the world. You know, the sort of clear fell pine forestry that we've got here is, in my view, and in that of some Canadian researchers who've just released a report recently, a big issue. It makes extreme flood events up to 18 times more likely. So forestry practices is one thing that I think we should look into. It's a very long-term thing. I understand that. I'm not anti-forestry, but we need to think about the practices. I'm very pleased to hear that, you know, we're working on wetland restorations. I think those are important, both wetlands and forests. They actually act like a sponge.
Sorry, Timo.
Oh, no, I've got so much more.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it. That's it's good stuff. That's it for this moment.
And we'll pass the baton on to Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a massive topic, and there's never going to be enough money to do all the things that communities would like to see in terms of resilience. And a lot of it is about changing mindsets and changing approaches and changing attitudes, but it's also about leadership. And council has a big role in that, and leading by example is one thing, setting in place processes. And information is crucial. And there's been a big debate recently about how much information is available to individuals, property owners, householders, so they can manage their own hazards, become more resilient themselves. Council has a role in ensuring people don't put themselves, build in harm's way. One of the challenges around many of our townships and current urban development is it's already subject to multiple natural hazards, whether that's sea level rise and or river flooding and or a combination of both. So one of the challenges around intensification and growth and growing populations is you can't necessarily keep people in some of these locations. The leadership really needs to start at central government, and we're still waiting for a climate adaptation legislation. Previous government nearly got there. This government promises it will. That's going to set the benchmark. Banks and insurance companies will have a massive amount to do with changing people's attitudes and approach. We have to continue to invest in infrastructure. River management, although it's not nearly as simple as many people seem to make it sound post the flood events, where you just simply strip out the gravel and make a deeper channel. Investing in infrastructure such as stop banks that protect the billions of dollars worth of assets that both people, businesses and householders own in a place like Motueka, which has proved its worth in the recent flooding events. And then the whole debate about future location, relocation versus protection. And as I say, for many of our existing communities, that is a very challenging debate with very significant impacts for them as individuals and their families. And none of these things are going to be solved quickly, unfortunately. But you've got to start somewhere, and sometimes, the little things that you start with will grow into bigger outcomes in the future. But the key thing is you start.
Thanks very much, Tim. And over to you, Joanna.
Right, now I'm going to audience questions. And the first question is from Anne Wheatley. And she asks, after this winter's devastating floods, how will you speed up the climate response and resilience plan and make our communities more resilient to future extremes? Now, that question is fairly similar to the last question. But Anne is asking how to speed up and perhaps the long-term resilience plan. But don't hesitate to say that you've already answered that if you feel that that's the case, or if you want to add to it, go ahead. And we will start this round with Richard Johns.
Speeding it up is going to be a real issue because we're struggling to do what we're doing now. So to actually speed it up means that we've got to find some more money, some more resources and things to do it. And I don't think at a particular time that's going to be able to happen. I think it will be a long-term fix for the resilience thing, but we have to sort of plan to what we're going to do rather than just let it happen haphazardly. So yeah, I can't see the speeding up happening in the short term.
Fair enough. We'll go to Timo. You might have a chance to say the further things you want.
Oh, there's so much to say, Joanna. Look, good question. And I mean, there's only a simple answer to it. Prioritize it. If you go to my website, Timo4Tasman.nz, you'll find an action plan for stronger towns and villages in which I clearly outline what we need to do in order to get to the right outcomes. And prioritizing adaptation planning is right at the top as number one. We need to know what the risks are before we even start doing anything, because otherwise it could be wasted. We need to know where we put our infrastructure, where is relatively safe, and what we can protect.
Thank you, Tim. And on
Be more.
sorry?
Tim with an O.
Okay. On to Tim King now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think speeding it up is going to be challenging. I agree with Timo. Planning is where it starts. We really do need central government's climate adaptation legislation, because that is going to set the parameters in which we're going to operate. And the whole liability and risk trade-off that communities are going to be asked to make really does need that national level legislative support. And then it does come down to priorities. And as a unitary council facing an enormous range of challenges, there are going to be very difficult decisions around priorities. But, you know, I agree. Planning is where it starts. Planning, information, and education to enable lots of people to make their own judgment calls is going to be a good place to start.
Thank you, Tim. And Richard Osmiston, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Spot on. And of course, Anne is feeling what's going on out there. Everything we've heard so far, as in the last 100 years, is not fast enough. And the biggest thing we can do is to stop going backwards. We're only going backwards. We're only causing this harm in the first place because we're allowing the rapacious exploitation, strip mining this country of all its resources and putting it onto ships at our own climatic and financial and social expense. That's what's really doing the harm. So stop going backwards and start going forwards. And Anne, quite rightly, is sensing the urgency. And it's got to be quick. You know, I spent my lifetime as an airline pilot and a licensed aircraft engineer, and we've got to be ahead of the aircraft. We can't be behind the aircraft waiting to see what happens. We've got to predict what's going to happen. And people like Anne are starting to see it. So great question. Thank you. And now we know what to do. Great.
Thank you, Richard. Over to Scott.
Thanks, Joanna. The next question from our audience, from David Bartle, is, as Mayor, would you oppose Sam's Creek mine on the basis of expected impacts to water quality? And if not, if you're not going to oppose it, why not? And we'll start with Timo.
Yeah, I mentioned Sam's Creek already. I mean, the question makes out that it's in the local authorities' authority to oppose it. It seems like it isn't. It's a fast-tracked process, but I think what we do need to uphold is the water quality. And, you know, that is something where we should be putting our foot down and make sure that whatever happens there does not impact the water quality at the Marble Aquifer. And that is not only over the next 5 or 10 years or over the lifetime of the mine, but it's also in the long term. And that's where often a lot of these problems happen. So I would look at that very carefully and make sure that that is ensured.
Thanks, Timo. And over to Tim.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone's really in a position to support or oppose, unless it's on philosophical grounds at this point in time, because there isn't enough information about exactly what they're applying to do, over what time, how they intend to do it. I think the council's role, look, the council may at some point choose to take a position either in support or against. That needs to be based on the information that's provided once it is provided. The Water Conservation Order has a massive focus on the quality of water in the Takaka catchment, including Waikarapupu Springs. We had a plan change due to be notified. Again, it's been caught up in the great plan stop legislative process from central government. We have applied to central government for that to be allowed to continue. And that has to be the focus, regardless of who's making the final decision. The council has to advocate strongly for the strongest possible conditions, the strongest possible enforcement of those conditions. And I would have to say my strong preference is those decisions are made at a central government level, because having been through the great aquaculture debate in Golden Bay 20 odd years ago, I don't think councils are adequately resourced to deal with applications of this complexity and potential impact. So yeah, at this stage, I don't have a strong opinion either way.
Thanks, Tim. And over to Richard Osmiston.
Yes, I have a fairly strong position of one way or the other, and this is sort of one of those WTF questions, isn't it? And I don't know what the audience of Nelson Tasman Climate Forum are thinking about this, but to be starting a new gold mine in 2025 or thereabouts, which involves, whichever way you look at it, enormous consumption of diesel, to dig up the earth, poison it, process it with arsenic and mercury and whatever. They all have loads of excuses, but of course they're all bullshit, just to get a tiny quantity of a very precious metal that actually serves very little purpose in reality whatsoever, apart from making rich people feel good temporarily. I mean, it's farcical. I can't believe in the 21st century we're even considering it.
Thanks, Richard. And Richard Johns.
Yeah, we've just been through this process on a property down at Barrytown where they're going to do the mining down there. And I think it's up to the people to put very, very strong cases up, because I was quite impressed with the conditions that were put on the miners down there. And if people can put that, bring up those really strong cases backed with science, then I don't think a mine will go with like they used to, where the damage, environmental damage they did. To me, as mayor, we're here to represent everybody. So for me to say, yes, I'm not going to do it, or I'm not, I don't think is right. But what we can do is, well, like I say, I'm here to help everybody, to represent everybody. So no, I'm not going to take a fixed position on it, but I hope that the environmental process is strong enough and really robust enough that it comes out with a good result. Having spent 20 odd years with friends of flora trapping in the area and things like that, it's a pretty special area, and I'd hate to see it destroyed, because I think most of the gold in the world's in the Reserve Bank in America or somewhere like that, and with bank vaults. There's plenty of gold around. But yeah, so I'm neutral at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. And we'll hand back to Joanna.
Okay. Petra Decker asks this question. Just one moment. Tim King mentioned Jobs for Nature as an important program for restoration and protection of nature. I believe, unfortunately, the current government has now culled the program as to save money. It was a great program and has achieved lots. Does council have an alternative in mind? Because if we don't keep up the good work of trapping, planting and weeding, no, I can't read any further, but it sounds as if Petra is pointing out the problem of halting the programs of trapping, planting and weeding, and asks if there's an alternative to proceed. And first in line for this question is Tim King.
There is no obvious alternative at this point, and you're quite right. One of the challenges with so many of these programs is that they've invested so much in the initial planting, fencing, wilding pine control is another similar example, and then the funding disappears, and without the ongoing maintenance, upkeep, weeding, etc., you run the risk of losing all the gains you've made, or a significant part of them. There is no obvious replacement for the significant amount of money that's come through Jobs for Nature. Certainly councils are not going to be in a position using ratepayers funding to make up that gap. I think the only realistic one is working with groups like Katahitanga Mōtutaio, bringing in that philanthropic funding. And there is a lot of philanthropic support in this space. And then it's utilising community groups and community input, and people like Air New Zealand and their carbon sequestration offset, which have supported things like the planting on the way into Mapua, and the community investment in the significant planting on the coastal highway. So yeah, it is a massive issue, I agree, and there's no obvious answer to replace that funding at this point.
Thank you, Tim. Richard Osmaston.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, it's one of these another sort of farcical capitalism sort of distortions, isn't it? Where we have to sort of manufacture a way of doing what we want to do as human beings and pushing it somehow through bureaucracy and the monetary system to make it work. And of course, as soon as that breaks down, which it now has, the work stops. And as Tim quite rightly says, it's all just lost and it all goes backwards. You know, it's nonsensical. In the resource-based economy that we're proposing, after money, if we freed 90% of people from their pointless, extractive, exploitive jobs, they can still enjoy all the benefits that they had from doing that because they weren't responsible for the creation of healthcare or food or tires or jackets. They were just doing logging or making wine. They will be free to do anything they like. And as the philanthropic nature, as Tim also mentioned, of people who are in a position to do something voluntarily, people want to do this stuff. Everybody I've met in this country is passionate about restoration, conservation, looking after people and the climate and the environment. They just can't do it because they are crippled by the inaccessibility of the pretend tokens to get at that action. It's so easy to do what we want once we are free of capitalism.
Thank you, Richard Osmondson. Richard Johns.
Yeah, being involved with Friends of Flora for so long and seeing the struggle it is to get volunteers to go and participate in it, like the Friends of Flora do about 5,000 hours of volunteer work a year up there. So I think what we've got to do is concentrate on the ones that we've got and make sure they don't go back. I don't think there's going to be another source of money, but it's tapping into those volunteers, tapping into the young kids and getting them into that mindset once again, where they want to be part of it, where they enjoy it. It's not just going trapping, it's a day out in the bush and all the good things about being out there. So I think it's just trying to involve far more in the community to do it. And yeah, especially at a younger age, the younger you can get people involved in it. There's not that many people out there. Like we had to travel from here over to the Cobb because we couldn't get anybody in Golden Bay to actually do the trap lines up there. So it's pretty, it's not quite as easy as what it looks. So to me, it's getting involved with the community and getting them on board, because if you haven't got them on board, it's going to be a losing battle.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Timo.
Yeah, look, I don't have an awful lot to add to this. It's a really difficult situation, but Tim is really negative about any council funding on this, and I think we don't need to be quite as black and white about this, because some of the nature-based solutions they actually deliver infrastructure services, and some of them actually deliver infrastructure services at a lower cost than traditional engineering would. So where that is the case, and where we find that those sort of solutions would make our infrastructure networks more efficient, not less, I would be quite prepared to find some council funding for that.
Thank you, Timo. Over to Scott. We perhaps might have time for a quick round.
Yeah, I think this will be a quicker question. This one's from Benjamin Walsh, who asks, what are ways you could advocate to central government as mayor to get funding for more resilient infrastructure? And we'll start with Richard Osmondson.
Well, Ben, yeah, I think we might be waiting a long time, mate. And there's 78 other local authorities in that queue in Wellington already. And I mean, I'm not that old, but in the 25 years that I've lived in New Zealand, and I've seen it in the rest of the world as well, there's never enough to go around. And no matter how hard Tasman pushes, it won't make any difference, mate. We've got to come about this another way. Those psychopaths will never do anything for us. We've got to do it ourselves.
Thanks, Richard. And Richard Johns.
Yeah, well, like we've got the Brook, Waimorana and Nelson. We've got projects here. Buller's got projects. So I think it's getting a group of mayors together and actually going up there as a group to try and get some change, to try and get some more money, to try and have government change their attitude. Singly, we're not going to do it. And I think local government New Zealand's lost the plot a wee bit. So I personally would be advocating going and meeting with other mayors, getting them on board, and a whole lot of us going up there en masse as a group, possibly with our local MPs and that as well, to confront some people up in Wellington. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And over to Timo.
Yeah, look, I don't think that more resilient infrastructure needs to cost more. So I don't think it's going there with cap in hand asking for more money. I think sometimes it's just a question of how we do things. And I think the RMA reform that's being pushed through right now is a great opportunity to do things better. And I've had quite a few chats with Chris Bishop about that already. And I genuinely think he wants to achieve the right things for our urban areas. He's obviously also got quite a few lobbyists in his ear who push for some other things, but I think he's receptive to these ideas, and I would be more than prepared to go up and have a very in-depth discussion with Chris on that, how we would implement that, and potentially even get an exemption for Tasman to do things slightly differently. And if it works here, we'll roll that out nationwide. That's the beauty of a new law coming in. We have an influence on shaping it. So yeah, I'd be up there and have that technical discussion. But what I would like to point out is it's quite important to have that technical knowledge to have that discussion.
Thanks, Timo. And finally, Tim. Yeah, you're on mute, Tim.
I agree with both Timo and Richard. Look, I think advocating strongly to central government is crucially important, and the way that we got funding in two lots from both the previous Labor-led government and the current government towards investment in resilient infrastructure in Motueka was by collectively regional councils taking a case to central government, as I say, of both different sides of the political spectrum, to invest in that infrastructure for the long-term benefit of communities. So that is absolutely the way to go. It absolutely already happens. And I already spend a significant amount of time and effort on those exact conversations. And secondly, I also agree that the modern way of dealing with things like stormwater, so it's not big concrete pipes collecting stuff from miles of asphalt. There is, and you look in the development areas around Richmond and the future development areas around Motueka and also in Mapua, much more naturalised stormwater management systems that incorporate places for biodiversity, places for water quality, ensuring that the discharge that ultimately ends up in either the river or the sea is to a very high standard. And that can achieve a lot of outcomes in one project. But I would not agree with Timo that that doesn't cost a lot of money. The investment in those stormwater networks in both Richmond, Motueka, and ultimately in Mapua will cost many millions of dollars, but the benefits, in my view, will significantly outweigh those costs.
Thanks, Tim. And I think we will wrap up now.
Yeah.
So to everyone attending and who will later watch the recording online, your engagement is really important. And we encourage you to talk to friends and family about the election, your aspirations for the future. Things can and will get better if we make active engagement in these things that affect our shared future a normal behaviour. We need to renormalize caring about civics, about being involved in decisions for our future. A big thank you to the candidates, Timo, Tim, Richard, and Richard, for your time and for seeking to serve your community. We wish you all the best. Thank you to Marlene Morrow from the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum for her work setting these candidate meetings up. And a thank you to Joanne and the Climate Forum for all that they do. I'll close us out with a karakia. Hei karakia whakamutanga. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapunui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takata, koe rā I rongo, whakaria aki ki runga, kia tina, tina. Huye, taikie.
Hi.
And good evening to everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora, good evening.